Baruch Hashem, Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra, Memhei Bava Basra 45. And today's Daf is dedicated to Yeshua for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim, and Shmira for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. We're going to start on the bottom of Mem Daled Amabez, 4 lines from the bottom. Gufa, the Gemara taught, Amar Ravin Bar Shmuel Mishmei Shmuel. So Ravin, the son of Shmuel, said the name of Shmuel, Hamochar Sado Chavero Shelo Ba'achrayos. And if somebody sells a field to his friend and he's not guaranteeing it, so Reuben sells a field to Shimon, no guarantees. And now Levi comes along and says, hey, that's my field. In Reuben is not allowed to testify that that was actually his field that he sold to Shimon. He can't testify that that the field belongs to Shimon. Why? Because if he does so, he's actually protecting his own interests. Because if Reuven will have a creditor, good morning, Harold. If Reuven will have a creditor, then what will happen as a result of is that the creditor will be able to collect from Reuven's field that he sold to Shimon, and so therefore, it's in Reuven's interest to support that that was once his field, so that his creditor can collect it. We're in the bottom of 44b. I'll just say it again for Harold, so he can be with us and enlighten us with his questions and insights. On the bottom of 44b, the Gemara says that Rabban Bar Shmuel quotes Shmuel and says that if somebody sells a field to his friend, Reuven sells a field to Shimon, and there's no guarantees on the field, then Reuven is not, and then Levi comes along and says, hey, that's my field. Reuven can't testify that that's actually Shimon's field that he had sold him. And the reason is because it's Shema'amida b'fnei b'chovov, because Reuven's actually supporting his own creditor by doing such a thing. Why is he? Reuven's actually supporting his own interest. Because if Reuven has a creditor and the creditor comes along and says, hey, you owe me money, he'll collect that money from that field. And so therefore, Reuven's debt will be erased through this field. So he can testify that that field is Shimon's, that it was once his, because that's to his advantage. And so so that's the halacha. So the Gemara says, wait, how does this actually work? How does this actually work? Ida Islay Arach, we see we're on top of 45a. If there is other land, if Reuven has other land, so if that's the case, if he has other land, then his creditors will go for Reuven's other land. They're not going to go and seize it from Shimon. They'll take Reuven's other land. And either way, and if Reuven has no other land, well, he has no assets anyway. So what does he care about clearing his debt? What does he care if his creditors can get the field from Shimon? He doesn't have a vested interest. He has no other assets. So what's the difference? So the Gemara says, he has no other land. And so the creditor is going to take this land that Reuven had sold to Shimon if he would testify. But still, even though he has no other land, the Amar, he says, I don't want to be called a person who borrows and doesn't pay back. The verse in Psalm says, the borrower is wicked, he doesn't pay. I want my debts to be cleared. I don't want to get a reputation as a wicked person. So it's his advantage to get his debts cleared. Where it says still, okay, fine. So you're going to say he wants his debts to be cleared, so it's to his advantage to support that the land is Shimon's, and that way he has a vested interest in letting his creditors seize that land. But still, no, it doesn't matter if he doesn't testify. He'll be called, but why would you say it's disadvantage to let the creditor take the land? Even vis-a-vis Shimon, if the creditor will come and take the land, then Shimon will be upset at him. You sold me a land that there was a lien on it. And so either way, he's called wicked. So why is it to his advantage to support the land going to his creditor versus to the customer, the person he sold it to? So he should be allowed to testify. And Gemara says no. No, because who the Amar, no, he won't feel bad to the customer because he'll say, listen, I sold it to you with no guarantees. When you bought this land without any guarantees attached to it, you knew what you're getting into. And so therefore, I don't feel bad that you sold it. I'm not going to be considered wicked after I sold you the land, you took that gamble, you took that risk, and you lost it. That's just what's called to do business. So now the Gemara moves into a slightly different case. Machar is Rava. Rava used to make the proclamation when he was giving his drashas. Rav Papa. Some say Rav Papa used to make this proclamation. The Salkin La'ila, those who go up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, or those who go down. Going up to Israel is called going up. Going to Israel is called going up. Going to Babylon from Israel is called going down. Even though Babylon is east, they called it up and down. But when you go to Israel, you're going up in Kedusha. So the Salkin Eretz Yisrael, Salkin La'ila, the Nachton Tatai. So they used to make this proclamation. Hi Bar Yisrael, Tezabin Lechamro Yisrael Chavre. So let's say there was a Jew who sold a donkey to his fellow Jew. And then idolater came along and took it. So Reuben sold his donkey to Shimon. Comes along the idolater, and he takes it from him. Comes along and takes it from him. Dinahu the mavti lemine. So then the halacha is that Reuben, who had sold his donkey to Shimon, and now the idolater took the donkey, Reuven has to be mavtze. Yeah, mavtze comes from the verse "Apotzes David Avdol Mechar Va'ah," meaning rescue. One who rescues David, his servant, from the sword. So he has to rescue the donkey. How does he rescue the donkey? There's a dispute amongst the Rishonim. Some say this is the Tosfos, and Tosfos' approach is that he needs to pay. So Tosfos says that he has to pay him. He says, bring a proof that he took it from you and I'll pay you back. That he has to pay him. That's what Tosfos says. He needs to buy off the guy who bought it from him to get to return the money. But most of the commentaries say, no, it means he needs to advocate for him. He needs to go to court to try and prove that he had sold, that this was the Shimon's donkey, which he had sold him, and this idolater has nothing to do with it. I mean to say, you can't just say it's nothing to do with me. This is between you and the idolater. He says no. He has to go to court on his behalf. Yes, Harold.
Why is someone
Right. Why did they give it? So Harold, that's the question. Why was this just a speech that they would give as the pilgrims were going up? I don't know. I don't see anything right here on the daf about it, but I think I don't know that it's necessarily specific to that. It's just that this is a speech they used to make when the people who were the travelers, they were traveling with donkeys, they were merchants, so they used to say this, you just need it. Maybe they wouldn't, they sell it, they don't know the people in those areas, they don't know the locals. This is your responsibility. So that's what you have to do. If you sell it to the Jew and the idolater takes it, you have to be either pay back the Jew or advocate on his behalf. The low Amran, the Gemara is going to put several limitations on this. When do we say this? We always say this in a circumstance where it's not known that this donkey that Reuven sold to Shimon, it's not known that this was clearly from Reuven's donkey farm. But if everybody could really tell that this was part of the herd that came from Reuven, well, then you don't need to go and advocate on his behalf, because that's a clear case of just straight out mafioso type theft that the idolater is doing to the Jew. If it's a clear case of mafioso type theft, that's not your responsibility to get involved. It's only where it's a gray area, the idolater comes along and is trying to prove that it's his donkey through the legal system, then you have to get involved. And we also only say this where the idolater didn't take the donkey with the saddle. Because if he took the donkey with the saddle, it's again an indication he's just, like a mafia guy, taking everything by force. Honestly, with the day, well, but if he took the donkey with the saddle, then the Jew doesn't have to get involved. The original Jew doesn't have to get involved. A Maimer Amar, a Maimer says actually, and we pass him like a Maimer. Well, even if you don't have any of these limitations, you don't need to get involved. My timer, what's the reason why you don't have to get involved? It's known that as a baseline, an idolater is just going to go in and might is right and take it by force, and you're out of luck. It's not my job to protect you from the idolaters. That's your job. As it states, Asher PM, as it says in the verse, Asher PM, Tiber Shav, Viminam, Yamin Sheker. Your mouth speak falsehoods, and coming out of their right is sheker, is falsehoods. So that's the concept. So okay, now we're going to the next sugya. It said in our Mishnah, Uman Enro Chazaka, a craftsman can say, oh, I have this, let's say he's a shoemaker, can say, listen, I have the shoes in my possession. I see you have witnesses that they're yours, but I've had it for 3 years, therefore it's mine. I bought it from you. The craftsman doesn't believe that because the guy's a shoemaker. So the guy's, he's got a shoe store, of course. He's not going to be, people bring him the shoes. So the craftsman can't establish that chazaka like a person on the land could. So Rava says, this halacha that the craftsman doesn't establish a chazaka, that's only the case. So let's say the craftsman's name is Reuven. That's only where Shimon gave the shoes to Reuven in front of witnesses. And then Reuven can't say, oh, these are my shoes because I have them here for 3 years. He says, no. Shimon says, I gave them to you with witnesses to repair them. So that's where he can't establish a chazaka. But let's say Shimon gave the shoes to Reuven without any witnesses, because Reuven always could claim, listen, these were never your shoes to begin with. I don't know what you're talking about. You claim you had shoes. When Reuven, since he could have said, listen, you have no proof that whatsoever that you gave me these shoes, therefore, when Reuven says, I bought it from you, meaning to say he's believed, meaning to say, this idea that the craftsman has no chazaka, that's only where witnesses saw the craftsman get the shoes from the customer. So the customer could say, listen, these are my shoes. And then even though Reuven has them for 3 years, we can no longer claim, or however long the chazaka is, not necessarily 3 years, he can no longer claim, I bought them, because he has witnesses that he gave them and he's a craftsman. But if he didn't get them with witnesses, then we believe his claim that he bought them, because he could have always said, listen, you have nothing to do with these shoes whatsoever. That's what Rava says. So Abai rejects that. It says, if that's your ruling, I feel nami. Well, then even if there were witnesses that he gave it, Reuven should be believed. Why? Because Reuven could have always claimed, since he always could have claimed, I returned it to you. And we'll see that this is part of a larger debate, whether or not if you get a deposit in front of witnesses, if you have to return it in front of witnesses or not. Since Abai is saying you don't have to return in front of witnesses, he could have always claimed, I returned it to you. And so therefore, if he says, I purchased it, he would be believed. And so therefore, Abai is rejecting Rava's distinction between whether there are witnesses or no witnesses. He says the craftsman can't establish a chazaka. So Amroi Rabba, so Rabba says, Rabba was the teacher of Abai and Rabba. So basically, Abai is based on the assumption that if you get a deposit with witnesses, you can return it without witnesses. So Rabba says, no, Abaye, your assumption is that if somebody deposits something, we're on top of 45b, somebody deposits something with witnesses, he doesn't need to return it with witnesses. Excuse me, but we don't accept that assumption. We don't accept that assumption. If somebody gets something from his friend with witnesses, he actually needs to return it with witnesses. And so since he has to return it with witnesses, he's not believed to say that he returned it. And so therefore, he doesn't have the migu that he could have always said, I returned it, and so therefore we don't believe him when he said he purchased it. So again, Abaye and Rava basically have two arguments: whether or not you need if you get something in front of witnesses, you need to return it in front of the witnesses. Abaye says you don't, and Rava would say you do. And as a result of that, that leads to the fundamental dispute. This idea that the Uman has no chazaka, Rava says that's only if he gets it. Let's say he got the shoes, the first case, with witnesses. Without witnesses, the Uman can establish a chazaka, and Abaye says no, he has no chazaka whether or not he has witnesses. So the Gemara challenges Meisvei Abaye. Abaye challenges Rabba and Rava. Again, Rabba and Rava are saying that this idea that the Uman has no chazaka, that's only if there are witnesses. But if there are no witnesses, he can establish a chazaka. So we say, Abaye says from the Brisa, it says Ra Avdo biad Uman v'taliso biad choves. Let's say a person saw his slave in the possession of an Uman. He saw a slave, working with the shoemaker. V'taliso biad choves, or he saw his garment with the laundryman. And Amarlo, and he said to the Uman, what's my eved or what's my shoes doing with you? And the shoeman replies, you sold it to me. You gave it to me as a gift. That is not going to be considered a valid argument. So the assumption here is he sees it, he doesn't have witnesses, and we still say his claim is no good. He can't establish a chazaka. But which would imply that if he had witnesses, he could establish a chazaka. And so this is a question. So Abaye is basically saying, if you see that, well, the Gemara is going to flesh it out. But again, you see the slave with the Uman, or the talis with the laundryman, and he says, what's this doing with you? Then he says, you sold to me, you gave it to me. He hasn't said anything. But if he says, Befanai amartu lo lamachro, but if, and here the assumption is that there's a third party there, and the original owner sees the eved or the garment not in the hands of the craftsman, but in the front of the third party, and he says, what are you doing with my garment or my eved? And he says, Befanai amartu, in front of me, you told him, i.e., you told the craftsman, Lamochro libimatana, to Lamochro velitno libimatana, you told him to sell it or to give it to me, then Dvarv Kayaman, then it's going to be valid. So the Gemara says, why in the first case is the craftsman believed? Why in the first case is the craftsman not believed? Whereas in the case where it was given to a third party, we do believe him. The Gemara asks the question, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. So what's the difference between the first case and the second case? In the first case, we don't believe the craftsman, and the guy gets his slave back or his garment back. And in the second case, we do believe him, and he gets to keep it. So Amar Rabba or Rava. So it says distinction is as follows. Seifa biyotzeis mitachas yedei acher. Well, in the last case, as we were mentioning, there's a third party involved. And this third party is saying to him, Befanai, he says, in front of me, you told him to sell it or to give it to me as a gift. And the reason why we believe him is Migu, the Ibai, because this third person, there's no witnesses to anything, and he's not a craftsman. So he could have always said, listen, I bought it from you. So since he would always be believed to say he bought it, so since he says, listen, in front of me, you told this other guy to sell it to me or give it to me, he's believed. Because anyway, if you just have an object in your possession, you're believed to say that this was yours unless the other guy brings witnesses and proof. But Katani Mias, right? Yes, Harold, you had a question?
Yes, that's just.
No, you need two witnesses to establish it, usually. So, yeah, so he would have to have witnesses.
This here's just one.
And so far, we haven't seen the claim of any witnesses. The first case, what's happened is, and we're going to talk about the first case in a second. We're going to go into it, but in the first case, he comes to a craftsman and he says to the craftsman, "That's mine." And the craftsman says back to him, "You sold it to me," and the craftsman is not believed. The second case, he comes to a third, not to the craftsman, he comes to a different person, and he says, "What are you doing with my coat?" And the third party says, "You told that person to give it to me." Reuben goes to Shimon and says, "What do you do with my coat?" And Shimon says, "You told Levi to sell it to me or give it to me." We believe Shimon there because he could have just said, "I bought it straight from you." So since he could have just said, "I bought it straight from you," and we would believe him because he has it in his possession, we believe him when he claims he got it from a different person. There's no witnesses yet to anything. But now we go back to the first case. Gemara says, and what's Katani Mias? In the first case where he goes to the craftsman and the craftsman denies it and says, "You sold it to me, you gave it to me." We don't believe the craftsman. Why not? Katani Mias Reisha, but in the first case we said Ra. We said in the first case that the purchaser, that the guy who claims it was his, he saw it in the possession of the craftsman. Now he saw it with the craftsman, and then he claims it's his. Hey Chidami, what must be the case we're talking about? Ida Eka Edem, if he has witnesses and that proves that it were his. Lamali Ra, what does it mean he saw it? It should just be Nasi Edem Inishkal. It must be that he could just bring the witnesses and take it. So it must be that we're talking about a scenario is Elalav Deleka Edim. We see that there are no witnesses. V'chira, and nevertheless, we say we're talking about a case where there are no witnesses. V'chira mia tafasle. And nevertheless, if he sees it, he can seize it. Why? Because the craftsman is not believed to have a chazaka. And so we see from here that this is a proof against Rava, because Rava says the craftsman is not believed to have a chazaka where the first party has witnesses. But if he has no witnesses, the craftsman is believed to have a chazaka. And Abaye challenges it. And this price proves that if he has no witnesses, he could still take it. That if the original owner has no witnesses, he could still take it from the craftsman. So it's a question against Rava. So Gemara says, no. Well, olam the ika edim. So there are witnesses here. We're talking about a case where there are witnesses. And nevertheless, he's not allowed to just come in and take his object unless he saw it in the hands of the craftsman, because without that, the craftsman is believed to say that he bought it from him because he bought it from him because he could always say, "I returned it to you." So he can only make this claim once he has already spotted it in the hands of the craftsman. Gemara says, "Vaha." The Gemara says, "How could you say that if he doesn't see the object in the hands of the craftsman, even there are witnesses, then the craftsman will be believed to say he bought it?" Vaha'at hu da'amas. You are the one who said, "Hamafkid eitzal chavero be'edim tzarachafaro be'edim." Didn't you say, a very strong part of your argument was that if you deposit something with witnesses, you need to pay it back with witnesses. So therefore, even if he didn't see it, the craftsman should be on the hook because he has no evidence that he returned it. So Amarle, Abai says, actually, I reversed myself from that case. I now no longer think that if you borrow something with witnesses, you need to return it in front of witnesses. So again, where are we at this point? That Rava has said that the craftsman, when we say he has no chazaka, that's only if the claim against him is made with witnesses. But without witnesses, the craftsman has a chazaka, whereas Abai says, regardless, the craftsman has no chazaka. So Masav Rava was Siyuye Rava. So Rava challenged Abaye, and he wanted to help Rava. So again, Rava's position is that if there are no witnesses, then he has no chazaka. Whereas Abai, there are no witnesses, he has a chazaka. The craftsman has a chazaka, and Abai says if there are no witnesses, the craftsman still doesn't have a chazaka. So we learn in the following case, in the following brisa, noticing taliso uman. Somebody gives his garment to the craftsman. Somebody gives his garment to the craftsman. Uman omer shtaim katzatztali. The craftsman says, "Listen, I promised. You told me that to fix your garment, it was going to be $2. And the customer says, "No, I only promised you $1. Calls man shatawas biad uman." As long as the garment is within the hands of the craftsman, then Bava Basra then the Bava Basra, the customer, has to bring the proof, meaning to say witnesses that he agreed to only $1, and the craftsman doesn't have to bring him the money until he brings him $2, because the craftsman is believed by his claim, because he could have always said that he bought it, and since he has the garment, he could have always said he bought it, and the owner of the garment would have to take it out, and he has to bring the proof. But let's say the craftsman says, Nisanoa, let's say the craftsman had already given it to him. Now we look at it. Bismano, if he gave it to him, we already had this case in Bamitzia, that if he gave it to him at the exact time we're supposed to give it to him, Nishbavinotel, then he could take an oath and take the money, because we assume that the craftsman the Bava Basra was too busy to notice what he was getting everything at once. Avar's mano, but it was later on, later on, the craftsman would have to bring proof and get the money. Now, Heichidami, what's the scenario? Rava says, if there were witnesses that they saw when he gave the garment to the craftsman, who heard that the customer said, "I'm going to give you $2." Then, if this was a case where there were witnesses, then obviously let's just see what the witnesses say. So, and they'll establish it, and there's no question. It must be that we're talking about a case, the Leika Adam. We must be saying that we're talking about a case where there are no witnesses whatsoever. And still, since there are no witnesses, Vikatani Uman Mahiman, and we say the craftsman is believed. And so we see from here that when we say Uman has no chazaka, that's only where the customer has witnesses. But if there are no witnesses, the Uman has the chazaka. It's proof from here. Vikatani Uman Mahiman. There's no witnesses, and we believe the craftsman when he says it was $2 and not $1. Migudi bai, because otherwise he could have said biadi. So since if he would have claimed it was bought, he would be believed. So therefore, he's also going to be believed about the actual price of the object. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, there are no witnesses whatsoever. So there are no witnesses whatsoever. So if that's the case, why do we believe the craftsman? Because we said to lo ra, because he has no proof. Remember, we said he doesn't see it there. So since he has no proof that it's actually there, therefore we're going to believe the craftsman. Because the craftsman could have always said, as we said on the previous page, the craftsman could have said, as Rabba's answer was on the previous page, because he could have always said that he had given it to somebody else. Because he could have always said he returned it to you. So therefore, we're talking about a case where he didn't see it. So since he could have always claimed he returned it to you, therefore believe him when he says that this was the price. So the Gemara says, Matzav Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak challenges Rabba's position. From the Mishnah we learned earlier, Uman ein lo chazaka. So it says a craftsman has no chazaka that it's in his possessions. Uman hu ein lo chazaka. Ha'achar yesh lo chazaka. So it says a craftsman doesn't have a chazaka that it's in his possession. But somebody who's not a craftsman would have a chazaka on the movables that are in his possession. Hey, Chidami, what's the case? If there are witnesses, achar amai yesh lo chazaka. Why do we say that about somebody else that he has a chazaka? It's not a chazaka under those cases. There are witnesses testifying. I'll have the leika edim. So there are no witnesses involved. And the katani uman ein lo chazaka. It says there are no witnesses. And that's where the craftsman has no chazaka. And so we see, even in a case where there are no witnesses, the craftsman has no chazaka. And so therefore, this is directly a proof against Rabba and Rabba Tiyufta, the Rabba Tiyufta, and Abayi's position is correct, that the craftsman has no chazaka, whether even in the case where the person who comes has no witnesses, the craftsman has no chazaka. All right, we stopped the daf here and we say, Rabbi Yosef.